Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. My name is Georgie Gould, and I'm the Project Coordinator of the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative and Business Manager at Global Community Resourcing. I'll be your moderator for today's session, focused on considering contemporary issues for the adoption of innovation and technology in community care. Before we begin today's presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we are meeting today. We pay our respects to all elders past, present, and emerging. Before we get started today, allow me to go over a few housekeeping points. Our webinar today is live, so we welcome any questions you may have throughout the webinar today. But I will let you know that all microphones have been muted. This is in the interest of the recording, but if you have any questions or comments, please add them in the question panel on the dashboard to the right of your screen. Our webinar today is being hosted by Global Community Resourcing for our online community of practice, the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative, which I will refer to as the Collaborative going forward. The purpose of the collaborative is to promote the use of smart assistive technology in service provision and delivery throughout Australia and the world. At Global Community Resourcing, we have been fortunate to work on a wide range of local, national, and international projects with researchers from across the globe to share and create innovative ideas in community care settings. Our webinars are created based on feedback and requests we receive through the collaborative, and we aim to connect diverse perspectives in research and development, as well as the creation and deployment of assistive technology in the community care sector. Our webinars focus on topics ranging from cybersecurity to innovation in community care, and we are proud to have more than over 70 free webinars, which have gathered over 10,000 views on our YouTube channel. Just a reminder that if you haven't formally registered at the collaborative site, it is accessible to all and free to register. A range of resources, news, and articles on the collaborative are available and regularly uploaded to the platform, and you can visit this on www.satcommunity.com.au and become a member for free today. Please note that the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative is not promoting or endorsing any particular product, research entity, or organisation. The purpose of our webinars is to serve and to inform viewers of various smart assistive technologies currently in deployment and/or development. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to dedicate this session to a great contributor of the collaborative, Professor Greg Teggett. Greg was a member of the original expert advisory group for the collaborative and worked tirelessly to ensure that assistive technology was firmly on the agenda for funding and policy development. Greg had an unparalleled career in science and was recognised as the Senior Australian of the Year in the Australian Capital Territory for his contribution to promoting the roles that technology and science played in promoting and achieving healthy longevity. We will miss Greg and his contribution to our various projects and activities. We will miss him greatly for his humour and wit, along with his friendship and support. On behalf of the collaborative chair, Anne Livingstone, our thoughts are with his wife, Robin, and his family at this sad time. Today's webinar will focus on considering contemporary issues for the adoption of innovation and technology in community care. We will hear from a number of speakers today on this topic, and our first speaker today is founding partner of Enkindle, Ms. Jennene Buckley, who will explore findings from the Top Home Care Innovations in Aged Care report. Jennene was recognised as one of the top 10 global ageing influencers at the Global Ageing Festival in 2021 and has won several national and international awards for digital transformation and innovation. Jennene currently sits on the National Aged Care Advisory Council, Digital Health Advisory to the Australian Digital Health Agency, and Bond University's Health Innovations Advisory Board. Jennene's career has included 30 years in health and aged care, including 20 years as CEO of Ferris Care, and is now founding director of Enkindle Consulting, that exists to support governments, peaks, and aged care providers through the next 5 years of reform with the goal of creating a world-class aged care system. Welcome, Jennene, to the collaborative. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Georgie, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to present on the topic of home care reimagined. The overwhelming desire of older people in Australia is to remain living independently, safely, and connected to their community for as long as possible, a desire that I'm sure is shared with older people across the world. In Australia, we are up to our third year of a comprehensive reform that has stemmed from the Royal Commission report into the care, dignity and respect of older people. As far as home care programs, the next wave, the next 2 years, will see major change in the way that home care operates within Australia. This will impact on a number of different aspects of home care operations. What we will see is a change in the funding model and introduction of efficient pricing. We will see a growth in competition and more providers in our marketplace. The regulation will insist on transparency and reporting. We will see an increased focus on consumer experience and a voice of the customer right through to boards of governance and the introduction of star ratings in home care. For many providers, this will mean an urgent redesign of their home care model to ensure that they can be successful in the new supported home program in 2025. For this reason, Enkindle wanted to explore service delivery models that were evolving nationally and internationally to look at emerging innovations, and has recently published a report with 11 key themes on what we will see as changes as far as new home care models. I'm going to touch on this afternoon just 4 or 5 of those themes, and of course the report is available as a resource nationally and internationally to be able to review the comprehensive themes. But before I step through these themes, what I would like to do is just to touch on and acknowledge some of the macro trends that are impacting on future home care design. Firstly, of course, for home care providers for the next 2 decades at least, we're going to be faced daily with workforce shortages, with, of course, national and international workforce shortages that will insist on us redesigning and rethinking our workforce and our service delivery models. We are living in the Internet of Things. The way that we live and work has changed. Technology is a part of our everyday. We hold technology in our hands, for many of us, most of the day. This will impact on home care models and the expectation of consumers and carers in relation to the way that we communicate and interact with our consumers. As I mentioned earlier, an ongoing increase in the level of transparency and accountability that will be insisted upon from our funders and government, and as well as consumers. And then, of course, the gig economy is reshaping what we know as workforce with the introduction of online platforms and many workforce wanting to go into a more of a subcontractor role. And certainly since COVID, we're seeing the evolution of integrated care models or moving forward. In addition to this, of course, with COVID, we moved to a lot of virtual care and the use of technology, which has now become much more readily available and more acceptable, right through from virtual consultations, assessments, case management, much more social programs and therapy programs happening online, and the use of telehealth, of course. What we are also seeing is the increase in the number of high acuity, higher risk older people being cared for in a community setting rather than in a hospital or an acute setting. This provides opportunities for home care providers when they're thinking about their models for the future on their clinical intervention, workforce and governance models. And I guess when we started to look at our research, there was a number of strategic questions that we wanted answered, what we were looking for. We were looking for, how providers nationally, internationally were addressing the changing needs and expectation of consumers and workers, how they were using business and workforce insights to help them grow and to shape their service models, and how was the sector collaborating on modernised and current service models, and how, importantly, how was technology being used to improve customer experience, employee experience, as well as new service delivery models. Our approach was fourfold. We reached out to a number of peak bodies nationally and internationally to put forward organisations within their countries or their regional areas that were providing, innovative service models. We also called for submissions nationally and internationally for providers to come forward with some of their innovative models. And of course, we did a range of research, desktop research, to find those innovations. And with all the submissions and information that we gathered, we themed our report into 11 main areas of impact that we could see that where there were changes happening within home care. And as I mentioned, I'll just touch on a few of these. Firstly, I think what's worth noting is just more common use of client apps and platforms that accompany a home care operation. The ability for consumers and their carers to be able to download an app of their home care provider and be able to communicate with that provider through their smartphone or technology device. This includes being able to have transparency over their care and service delivery plan, the workers that are coming to their home and their times, being able through their app to organise appointments with their case managers, pay their bills, make complaints, give feedback, organise case conferences without the need of having to go onto a busy call centre and wait online to be able to talk to their provider. What we also have seen is examples, particularly seen an example within Australia of where conversational AI has been attached to that portal or app to enable consumers just to be able to use their voice to be able to contact their provider and be able to ask common questions that can be answered through the conversational AI, including questions around the services that are coming, when they're coming, who are they, who is the staff member that will be turning up to their home, as well as being able to request, as I mentioned earlier, request an appointment. There are many examples that we saw on-demand economy moving into home care. This market is growing, and so is consumers' demand for responsive services. With these platforms, these self-managed platforms, it enables consumers or their carers to be able to take much more control over the selection of their workers, as well as the time, negotiate the timing and the frequency of these services within, of course, a given budget if it was a government-funded program. These particular platforms are becoming much more mature in relation to their clinical governance, as well as the credentialing of the workers that are coming onto these particular platforms. What we do know in home care in Australia is that one of the fastest growing providers is the platform providers. These platforms provide personalised experiences to consumers, and this is certainly a platform or a consideration for traditional home care providers about how they can improve that communication, as well as empower their consumers more when it comes to selection of staff and the timing of their services. When it comes to smart home technologies, yes, of course, we have seen pendant alarms and some of this monitoring occurring for the last three decades. But what I certainly have seen of late is much more next generation type smart home technologies that are truly creating connected homes, but creating opportunities for older people to live safely, more secure and more connected. These devices, a good example is the Google Suite, where there is the Google Nest or the Google Hub, and a suite of peripherals that are connected into one connected smart home operating through an app, on a smartphone or a device. These peripherals could be robot vacuum cleaners or mops or robot lawnmowers, smart fridges, security alarms, automatic doorbells, Chromecasting to TVs, voice-activated electrical equipment, being able to set up night routines, being able to use these devices to be able to set reminders, and even by voice, being able to contact family and friends just by voice. What we are also seeing, in addition to, I guess, these smart home devices and telehealth devices being used in virtual care and hospital in the home environments. What we see here, or what we mean by virtual care, is where we're seeing organisations creating a team of clinicians or multidisciplinary team of clinicians and medical staff who monitor clients within their home 24/7 remotely. The ability for these particular virtual teams to also work collaboratively with workers in the field to be able to provide 24/7 response. Certainly one of the leaders that we had seen in virtual hospitals was Mercy Virtual in the US, who has been operating a virtual model for a number of years, supporting not only people in their homes, but also providing support to ICU and CC units in hospitals as backup eyes for those very busy areas. What we've seen in Australia is the introduction of a number of hospital in the home services where particular episodes of care, the default is within the home setting and rather than being in the hospital setting, with a number of organisations coming together collaborative to be able to provide those services. In Australia, this will soon be supported by virtual emergency departments that can provide specialist medical officers providing triage and clinical support to not only the hospital and the home providers, but also directly, eventually, to consumers within their home and within residential care settings. There was great examples of integrated care models that are being developed and implemented across the world. This is the partnership of health and hospital, primary care and aged care and home care providers coming together to provide a much more continuity of care for consumers and better client outcomes. Two of my favourite in the research, of course, was the PACE program in the US that is expanding across the US. This particular integrated care model is set up in a day centre environment where older people from the community are transported into the day centre, and a number of programs and services are wrapped around that older person while they're in that day centre. So not only great meals, exercise, activity and socialisation, but a number of allied and medical services while they're at the day centre, whether that be dental, general physicians, speech, occupational therapy, podiatry and pharmacy. With the consumers coming into that centre some 2 to 3 days a week. And then, of course, in the outreach or the in-reach model, particularly in the US, we saw examples of a number of key organisations coming together as a collaborative to provide intense hospital in the home, palliative care, as well as post-acute programs. So this is a huge opportunity, I believe, in the future for home care providers, where mobile primary care, mobile imaging, mobile specialist medical services and home care providers and palliative care providers working collaboratively with one shared record to provide services to keep somebody within their home rather than going into a hospital setting. What some of the predictions in the US, because of their values-based funding model, is we're seeing quite a significant jump in these home-based interventions. In this particular chart, just two to pull out. For example, on the left-hand side, they're suggesting by 2025, 25 to 35% of primary care episodes will be in a home-based environment. And then on the far right-hand side, you can see that 20 to 30% of hospital interventions moving into a home-based care environment. Now, it wouldn't be a presentation on Home Care Reimagined without talking a little bit about artificial intelligence, which is a very exciting part of I guess, the future of home care. And there's a number of different areas that AI and machine learning is being incorporated. Firstly, and importantly in home care, particularly for viability, service continuity and client experience, is smart rostering and logistics. The ability to use AI to very efficiently and effectively match older people or consumers or clients with the workers that have the appropriate skills, knowledge, and experience to be able to provide the care and preferences of the care that person in the community. Also, being able to logistically make very efficient operating runs for staff members who's going from house to house to ensure that the services are very efficient when it comes to pricing. Predictive AI in a number of different areas, the ability to use our data to be able to provide predictions to home care providers on particular clients' risk for hospitalisation or rehospitalisation or falls, the ability to provide an idea of the cost of that particular episode of care through all the data that's been collected, as well as particularly in the home, if you have the sensors, to be able to start to map the routines of a particular person's home and to alert the home care provider when there's anomalies in the home care setting, whether that is the fact that, for example, a person has been going to the bathroom more frequently that day than it has generally. Also in workforce, as mentioned earlier, workforce shortages is something that is not going to be leaving us for a decade or two at least. To use predictive AI to be able to identify particular risks, risk profiles of staff that may be leaving, and that can be determined by monitoring a number of different KPIs as well as staff engagement. I've already mentioned about AI used with conversational AI with portals and apps, also using conversational AI in providing clinicians briefing summaries on what's happened with a client since the last time they visited. And then, of course, just AI used in automation of systems and processes, administration processes, that's going to reduce the amount of administrative costs, that's going to bring down the price, which will be very important in the introduction of activity-based funding in home care in Australia. And the last area I'd like to touch on this afternoon is digital programs. A number of examples of where programs have been established simply to build the IT capability and capacity for older people, the ability for them to enjoy the internet and work and using the internet like we take for granted every day, the ability to be able to do online shopping, online banking, being able to contact people through video calls, and using modern communication, messaging and emails to reduce that technology gap that may exist for some older people who haven't had that confidence. A significant opportunity for a lot of home care providers to be able to provide this service and also to achieve significant outcomes for older people, improving their independence and reducing social isolation. Now, there is a number of other themes within the report that I'd love to share with you, but I will leave that for you to investigate, and you will be able to do that through the top home care innovations in aged care report that you'll be able to download. I know that this presentation is being recorded, so you'll be able to grab the link or the QR code at another time. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennene, for your presentation today. Next speakers are Director of Standout Ageing, Dr. Kate Barnett, and Director of Research and Projects at Global Community, Miss Anne Livingstone. Their presentation will review the significant gaps in aged care and policy and planning in respect to technological advancements. Dr. Kate Barnett is the founder and managing director for Standout Ageing. In recognition of her contribution to the fields of ageing and aged care, Dr. Barnett has been honoured with an Order of Australia Medal and a Flinders University Distinguished Alumni Medal. In 2014, Dr. Barnett was awarded the Churchill Fellowship, which enabled her to study the teaching nursing home model in North America, where it originated in the 1990s. One of Dr. Barnett's research specialisation involves technology and how it maximises the potential contribution to ageing well. She was the lead writer for Australia's first technology roadmap for aged care sector and continues to work with the Australian Aged Care Industry Technology Council in implementation of the roadmap. She is joined today by Anne Livingstone, who needs no introduction to this audience. Anne is chair of the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology, and her professional roles include Director of Projects and Research at Global Community Resourcing and Executive Lead at the Aged Care Industry Information Technology Council. Anne has been involved in the community care sector for over 3 decades, specifically in the area of service delivery, research, and development. She is committed to delivering innovative, quality, and responsive community services through person-centered care. Welcome, Kate and Anne, to the collaborative. Please take it away.
Georgie, thanks for that warm introduction. It's my great pleasure to work again with Dr. Barnett, my esteemed colleague Kate, and we're just going to lead you through, I guess, we've been sitting back, Kate, looking at a range of issues since we were both involved in the development of the technology roadmap. Way back when in 2017, when it was really an open response to the then ministerially appointed sector committee, who were given the charge of sort of reviewing the next 5 and 10 years of aged care and community care, and were given the task of doing a roadmap for improvements. In that roadmap, we didn't note the inclusion of the role that technology and innovation would play. And so for the council, Kate and I worked on this project in detailing the first technology roadmap. But Kate's going to cover some of that later. In terms of what we're going to cover is we're really going to look at what the work has been undertaken so far and what the current environment is detailing for us, particularly where evidence is showing really great opportunities for success at improving quality outcomes for older people. But in disclosing where we are now and reviewing where we've been, we do think there's a lot more work to be done. So our presentation is going to cover some of that. So I'm going to hand over to Kate at this point. And Kate's going to lead us through some of our early work and some of the findings. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Anne. You're probably wondering why we've given you an outline of the technology roadmap, given we're talking about where things are at now and what's needed. It's here partly for those of you who aren't fully conversant with the roadmap, but also because the issues raised, the direction set, remain relevant, even though they were drafted in 2016, 2017. So very quickly, the roadmap had the five destinations that you can see on your screen in front of you. It's important to look at these as interconnecting pieces, a bit like a jigsaw. They're mutually reinforcing, and you can't really have one without the other. A lot of people expected us just to focus on destination 2 and possibly destination 4, which are about how you assess people for care and how you provide care using technology as effectively as possible. But a lot of people forget about destination 1, which is the underpinning operational system, some of the things that Jennene just referred to that can make businesses more efficient and use resources well. 3 is about enhancing information for people. And again, referring back to Jennene's presentation, it has become even more important as we've shifted to increasingly to portal-based care and other approaches that require significant digital capability, digital literacy on the part of consumers, their families, and the workforce, which is what Destination 5 is about. So some of the issues, just plotting these against the particular roadmap destination, Destination 1 still applies. Need for greater interoperability, open standards, and common platforms, in particular, so that we can share clinical and other data across providers and across sectors. And overall underdeveloped technology readiness in the sector. Now, this is something that's about more than digital literacy. It's about a mindset that embraces technology and, I guess, a willingness to adopt. Fragmented capacity building, this varies across the sector, as Anne's going to talk about in her part of the presentation, and a failure to embed technology in care. So why embed? because we're not talking about an afterthought or an add-on. We're talking about technology being part of all of the planning, the design of standards, so that, if you like, a filter of technology is laid over pretty much everything that people do in the sector. We identified the need for a national data exchange and readiness for electronic data usage, and the need for aged care business to business and business to government interfaces, so that you acknowledge that we have quite an open ecosystem now affecting aged care, and this involves a secure exchange of data. With the second and third destinations, we talked, and these issues still continue, we talked about the silos between different service sectors, the failure to embed technology, the need for more informed choice and better navigation of systems, and insufficient co-design between end users, providers, consumers, their families, and technology developers and vendors. We talked about the need to improve consumer readiness for technology and to address a range of factors that determine whether or not technology is adopted. Finally, around destinations 4 and 5, we talked about the underutilisation of technology in the assessment and care planning processes. There is that is still, we believe, a large area of unmet need. And in terms of assessors in aged care, the absence for most of training in how you use technology effectively in assessment and communication and a range of other areas. The fifth destination was about building a technology-enabled workforce that addresses a whole range of digital literacy issues, as well as readiness to engage with technology. At the time, we talked about the need for more video conferencing infrastructure. I'm assuming, Anne and I, that this has probably changed since the pandemic, and an overall unmet potential for technology to improve workforce productivity. Jennene, in her presentation, when she talked about artificial intelligence, referred to the possibility of improving engagement with technology and using automated systems. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anne, who's going to talk about the Care IT report, which is based on research that was recommended by the Technology Roadmap that involved doing Australia's first benchmarking study of technology capability across the sector, and also with the recommendation to keep repeating this, that this was just a benchmark. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm going to lead you through a great opportunity that we had in 2020 to build on the technology roadmap. Some will say we were foolish to embark on this, but we got a direct offer from the Department of Health and Ageing a couple of minutes before COVID. And we commenced the project within days of COVID becoming a reality. And I think, Malcolm, you might have actually been in Australia at the time as COVID hit, just on your way back to Wales after working with us in Australia. But the government gave us a challenge to do the first benchmark across 4 areas. And this benchmark was about the capabilities and the capacity of aged and community care providers to respond to contemporary requirements in terms of business and administrative systems. They wanted a view of how things were going, particularly where B2G gateways were occurring, and online reporting was required, both in terms of accessing government services, but also reporting up from care providers to the government. A contemporary issue of the time, of course, was surveillance and monitoring, and we applied that the evidence that we were looking for across a range of applications of surveillance and monitoring. We also looked at telehealth and telecare, and then we looked at a range of smart home technologies, pretty broadly defined and applied in the sector. So what did we find? We found, we dived into how many systems people were using across those 5 parameters. We found that there were 420 indeed unique pieces of kit, platform software that we could find across those 5 areas. So people think the sector is complicated. The types of technology and the range of technologies is also pretty complex. We also found, I think, a highly representative of both the types of workforce we've got in front of us, the volunteer workforce that we rely on, and the range of consumers that we deal with and try to provide quality services to. But in terms of systems usage, we found that payroll and those systems that were related to financial management only were the ones that were most used. Probably nothing of great outstanding news to many people of the time in 2020, but our current work is showing that there has not been greater uptake wider. And we also found that within those systems across financial, there was little integration, and at best people were getting some interfaces, but clearly not to the level of streamlined operations and higher productivity. But in the non-finance technology areas, we found also that there was a really wide difference between the sector. We found a few extremely great examples of a high adoption, again, predominantly in financial systems, but also in e-learning software. But we also found extremely low adoption in things like legal and contract systems, asset management systems, and I think importantly and sadly in a big deficit in knowledge management systems. We also found overall very poor system security, and that that there was little thought and ability for older people themselves and their families to actually interact at a meaningful level with the systems that were in place at providers level. Thanks, Georgie. So what we did find that led us to, I guess, our next body of work is really to concentrate also on the need for standardisation. Where what we found was no streamlined workflow practices, no streamlined technology that was undertaking various tasks across those 5 areas. And recently we also have worked with the Australian Digital Health Agency to deep dive into clinical systems in residential care. And we found that we couldn't identify a common practice in the use of clinical care systems. And we equally found over 280 different unique pieces of technology, platform software that were used and identified by providers as helpful or essential to their provision of clinical care. So that's led us to work pretty solidly for the last year on looking at the areas where we need standardisation to move ahead. And we believe that particularly the standardisation of data, the use of data, the collection of data, the terminology of individuals and their journey through the aged care system is essential. And we've formed a very strong partnership with the Centre for Health Services Research. We've been looking at a range of research, but also the evidence internationally. We all also have recently commissioned a piece of work to undertake an evaluation of comprehensive geriatric assessment systems being used both across residential care and community care. And we're about to release that body of work in the coming weeks. We believe that that's really informative and foundational in terms of the data strategy that's needed to lead the uptake of technology and greater innovation in the sector. And we really are advocating for a 5-year transitional plan to put that in place. I guess the premise of our approach is that data standards will actually enable a better journey for older people and a better journey for aged and community care providers, in that we will collect data once but use it multiple times in a way that we can promote appropriate benchmarking and get some targeted use of the data that we've already got, but targeted use to inform better quality of care. So the key issues for us going forward are, I guess, in where we need to be positioned and what needs ongoing attention and requirements. And I think, Kate, you're going to take over from here and just take us through some of the key issues that we've found as we've endeavoured to look at the research in the last 5 years, the evidence about where the sector has been positioned, and the needs that haven't been addressed but are actually missing from the current debate.
Thank you, Anne. Anne's alluded to some of these issues that were identified also in the Care IT report, in particular a divide across the sector in access, being able to afford technologies, knowledge, and in to what degree age and technology sector people collaborate with each other. The extent to which, when you look at the sector as a whole, technology is being utilised effectively is very inconsistent and very fragmented, and in part that we believe is due to the absence really of a national approach to embedding technology in aged care business and care delivery processes. The other thing that's really important to remember is that, you know, we've had massive ongoing reform, most recently the Royal Commission, and that's what we would call internal reform. But really the sector, and if you think back again to Jennene's presentation, is being shaped by a number of external drivers of change, especially digital technologies. That kind of illustrates it. If you can't read the caption, it says you can't list your iPhone as your primary care physician. And that's funny, but it's also true. So the continued persistent sector silos really highlighted now when we want to exchange clinical data across care sectors, particularly aged care and health, which of course, when you're working with an older population who are very likely to be having multiple needs and chronic need, this becomes incredibly important. Similarly, there is a continued silo effect between the aged care and technology sectors. However, that is improving, and I'm sure is going to continue to improve because of external drivers for reform. Around the issue of interoperability, which still needs resolution, when you're sharing data and you move to open standards, you can see a blurring of those boundaries, and we expect that to continue as well. Multiple impediments, I won't dwell on these, to engagement with technology. One of them, I'd like to draw your attention to the third dot point, something again that was highlighted in the Care IT report, is the need for, and was a recommendation, I think, Anne, for greater research evidence about the return on investment for providers on investing in technology. There are a lot of terrible stories out there for people who've purchased with limited resources technology that's not fit for purpose, which is also an issue around inappropriate or lack of co-design. But we do need to be able to say to providers, this is the kind of return you can expect, so that technology purchasing, rather than being seen as simply a cost, is increasingly understood as an investment if you purchase the appropriate technology and you use it to effect. Other impediments that we've identified are the need to change current pricing and funding models so that they acknowledge the impact of digital transformation and the cost of investing in innovation. Thank you, Georgie. Okay. We are seeing, and Jennene's presentation also alluded to this, a growing number of organisations operating in a more of an intelligent environment, using automated processes, using artificial intelligence, whatever, to better plan their resourcing and how they deliver services to make them not only more effective but more efficient. The next level of progress, we believe, requires more open environments that are characterised by seamless connection between data shared across different devices and services and stakeholders. This, again, you can't keep relying on organisational level impetus for this. We really need a system levels agreements on interoperability and standards and so forth, and possibly a sharing of resources.
Thanks, Kate. I guess we've got a big agenda there. And where do we start? I guess for us, there's a couple of key considerations that need to be done right now and are overdue to be done. Kate just referred to integration. We heard from many providers that the interface that's barely happening now between technologies is just not good enough, that we need to really look at how we can get full integration of the technologies being used. Part of that is really trying to get to the understanding of what conformance software might look like across a range of usages. We've been actively involved in the conformance software moves for the adoption of My Health Record. And indeed, we're very active in the standardisation and the look for conformance software that might meet the requirements for standardisation of data across the board, as well as standardisation of clinical care use, systems use. So that's a really big agenda we can't do on our own. We need vendors to be really actively involved. But we're also seeking some more improvements in the business to government interfaces, particularly in terms of those that relate to reporting and data use, but also in the unknowns where Jennene again alluded to the requirements for upcoming standards of new community care programs. I guess we're all in the dark about that at present time, and we've got a very short runway to ensure that the industry is positioned and ready for those reforms. None of this can be done without industry at the forefront of co-design and at the forefront of really not only co-designing the futures that might come our way via government policy and program change, but co-designing the future of really good quality of care that consumers are identifying, older people themselves are articulating, and that providers themselves should be able to actually design for. So that's it from us. That's our contacts. We'd love to have you reach out to us and talk further about this agenda. I guess you're seeing presentations today that hopefully showing a commitment and a need to work very collaboratively on making this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barnett and Anne, for your presentation today. Our final speaker for today is Professor Malcolm Fisk, who will be presenting on keeping health and care in focus in a new world of data. Professor Fisk is a Professor of Ageing and the Lifecourse at the University of Central Lancashire in the United Kingdom. He has extensive international experience in a widely ranged publicist. His speaking engagements include keynote presentations internationally and holds visiting positions at a number of universities. Notably, among his roles and activities as his leadership of respective European Commission projects focus on developing a code of practice for telehealth services and addressing the range of adequacies for standards around information communication technology and active aging. This positions him at the interface of people and technology, where for projects and in his wider research and teaching, he's championed the need for ethical, inclusive, and responsive design and service approach. Welcome, Professor Fisk, to the collaborative. Please take it away.
Thanks, Georgie. I'm delighted to be here. And the presentation I'm about to give is actually it certainly links with the first two presentations, but it may be something that's rather unusual for most people who are in the audience, bearing in mind that I'm going to be dipping into the world of academia and actually pointing to various issues that many academics, or some academics, I should say, will be thinking about in the context of technologies and older people and care services. But actually which haven't been dealt with in any great depth. So I'm going to move on in my presentation to some key issues or some key ways of thinking that may actually help in the arguments that are being put forward by Anne and Kate, if you like, for a new approach, if you like, to the way in which people access and use services and things like this. Anyway, here we go. What do I mean by defensible telehealth in the title there? We don't need to dwell on these things. We know that telehealth commands more attention at the moment, and Anne pointed to, quite amazingly actually, what was it, 400 and something different industry partners who were involved in the work that she and colleagues did for the Care IT report. Amazing, really, but it just shows how complex the area is. And we can argue the case that there's been a paradigm shift, a shift in thinking around the use of technologies, or the way that services provide technologies for the benefit of older people. And linked with those, obviously, there's some issues which I'll come on to about data and the people's trust in the use of data, and the ethos of some of the commercial players in the field. And this means there's implications not just for service design, which has been emphasized, but also the design of the technologies themselves and how they are configured and so forth. In fact, I will skip over this side. This is just referring to paradigm shifts and just wanting to make sure that everyone really appreciates what the idea of a paradigm shift is. Very, very quickly, it's to do with clearly changes in thinking, changes in processes, and in a more meaningful and more substantial kind of way that is normally the case. So we're not talking about a gradual change. We're talking about something here which certainly takes place more rapidly. And you could say that the paradigm shift around telehealth is one that's been partly stimulated by the COVID pandemic. Right, so what I'm going to be talking about is the progress that I'm making in my work towards a socio-technological theoretical framework. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the point is that we are being shaken out of our comfort zones, and it's really all started around the turn of the millennium with the introduction of the internet and different kind of services access in different kinds of ways. Before which, of course, personal data were not such a big issue. The needs around care and health were certainly not so great. We've got a demographic agenda, of course, that we must consider. Institutional care was the norm for many people as well, and clearly we're giving much more emphasis now to supporting people in their own homes. Person-centeredness, very much part of our agenda. Telehealth technologies were fairly crude. I think Kate referred to this, and personal devices were largely absent. So things have changed really, really dramatically. And we have to say that service norms and technology configurations were geared to tasks, doing things to people and helping with their activities of daily living, and without giving enough attention to the way that people's lives could be enhanced and people could be motivated by having access to and using some of the new technologies that we're becoming more familiar with now. Right, so let's just take a little look from the users, yours and my perspective, and to think how a relationship with technologies works and how it should evolve in the future for us in our old age. I'm 73, by the way, so I'm kind of getting there. Now, the first thing just to mention is that in my exploration around social theories and technological theories, the general view is, and this is absolutely clear from various philosophers and social theorists, that technologies are not neutral. And there's a couple of names here that will be familiar to some of you, Martin Heidegger, Herbert Marcuse, and who are in the frame here of people who obviously gave some thought to technologies and how we link with those. But coming up to date, there are no specific socio-technological theories for telehealth, but issues are touched upon by two people, or three people, I should say, really. The first is Deborah Lupton at the University of South Wales, who's done quite a lot of work on digital health, and I'm sure that some of you are in contact with her and are aware of her work. And she explored a number of different theoretical approaches, though unless I'm wrong, I need to investigate a bit further. I don't think she's actually focusing on any particular one which she would recommend for adoption or pursuit for the future, and which might fit with the kind of framework that Anne was talking about. And you have some fairly recent work by Alexander Payne and Louis Neven in the Netherlands, which is looking at the idea of socio-geron technology. Now, I have got some issues with the whole notion of compartmentalizing this issue within the area of older people, but nevertheless, they do pursue some interesting ideas in their particular work at the moment. Right, Deborah Lupton, first of all, she focuses a lot on data around digital health, and most notable from her work is that she explores the issue of power. So she draws on the work of Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, and who does a lot of work on the history of health services, and indeed issues around the technological gaze. And clearly we can recognize in clinical health, in the area of clinical health, there are some power differentials that are very, very clear between the clinicians who deliver services as opposed to providing services, and the very often the compliant patient who accepts what it is that the clinicians actually recommend. So the issues of people's managing for themselves and looking after their health is perhaps subservient to ideas about the clinician control of the areas of health. And Payne and Neven, they explore the interface between what is science and technology studies, which came out of what's known as the Frankfurt School of theorists and what have you. And they do actually touch on various ethical tenets, which I would agree with, around things like inclusiveness, accessibility, and usability. But one of the interesting things they did look at and explore, and which I've been exploring as well, is the idea of scripts from a theorist called Madeleine Ackridge. Lupton, well, they are, in summary, Lupton is good on data, Payne and Neven are good on, stronger on theory, but we, I think, need to go further because of the fact that we are looking at the ways in which you and I and other people want to access services in the ways that suit our particular needs. And but Madeleine Ackridge put forward this idea of scripts, and she uses the idea to explain how technologies, technical objects build our history for us and impose certain frameworks. But the problem for us is those frameworks are often shaped by decades of old practices. So what I'm saying here really is that the people who develop the technologies and the people who market and provide those technologies for us have got an idea of how we're going to use them, which may not actually accord with what people actually want, what we actually want. Of course, co-design starts to come into this. So yes, the idea of scripts is that they can push us, or technologies, they can push us into specific roles. And she points, in fact, to users being groomed to learn the proper rules of conduct in relation to the users. And us, of course, may be service providers or service users. We may be a third-party organization or a statutory organization that is providing technologies to other people that have been designed in a particular way by the big companies and have been marketed in a particular way. Also, it may be that some of our professional bodies are very defensive about traditional patterns of work, which haven't fully taken into account the potential role of technologies within different services. Anyway, and those proper rules that we have to follow are consolidated by practice. They have been over decades, and they can be reinforced by standards and guidelines and those who have the power. In other words, obviously governing and political bodies, as well as the standards makers. Anyway, here we go. I've got I've written what I've called a couple of scripts. They may not be quite what Madeleine Ackridge had in mind, but here we are. For the first one here, our company, think of it from the point of view of a company who is actually marketing a particular product to you and your service. Our company product is intended for telehealth services. We must make a profit, but we're also in the caring business. So what our product does must be suitable and acceptable to end users who may be vulnerable, uncertain, and anxious. We will have to reassure them and gain their trust. Our product must help us do this, making sure that its use fits with the user's sometimes changing needs and choices, and ensuring the control and security of their personal data. Now, that's the sort of message that probably most of us on this call would want to hear from people who are supplying or offering different kinds of technologies, and we might be sharing information about those technologies with the users of our services. But there is an alternative scenario here, and here's another company approach. The silver economy is huge and rapidly expanding, and many older people have big savings. This means rich pickings for us with our new product. We must make sure the old folk want our product. If they're vulnerable, uncertain, or anxious, we want them to stay that way so they're ready to buy. The icing on the cake is that we will be able to scrape their personal data, and we've got a deal ready to sell their data to Microson, who can then further exploit the market through other products and services. Next slide, please. Obviously, that points to the kinds of scripts that we recognize are really out there. I mean, amongst Anne's mention of 400 and something different companies, industry partners in Australia, then some of them will subscribe to each of those approaches, perhaps most of them somewhere in between. And they really are there. But I think a good socio-technological theory is needed to guide us. And let me give you an idea of what that such a theory might contain, at least in the areas of care and data, which is the focus of my presentation. Next slide, please. Right, the thing just to point out or re-emphasize is the fact that I'm looking at things at the interface of these three areas: health and care services, people and their behaviors, and technologies that are used in these contexts. And the kind of theories I've been looking at, by the way, have tended to focus on the link between the technologies and the services, and haven't given enough consideration to the people and their behaviors and the way that people interact with those technologies. And anyway, and I've explored, and I'm setting out at the moment 5 different themes, which will be in a book that will be published early-ish next year with Palgrave Macmillan. But today, as I say, my focus is on data and on care. And notable, by the way, is the fact that at the top of my list of themes is one about human rights. They do relate, as indicated, to the approach taken by professional, commercial, ethical, and theoretical perspectives. So human and equal rights, care, well-being, and relationships. I wanted there just to re-inject the notion of care, not in terms of tasks, of course, but in terms of the very interpersonal nature that care takes, and something that very often gets lost in the debate, and all the things certainly that relate to illness and support and love and other things that don't tend to get mentioned too often. There's issues clearly around organizational and professional power and the way that those are defended, and then the way that the power balance needs to shift away from the clinicians and the service providers to one which is more in partnership with service users and the people who want to access information and so forth in new kinds of ways. There are some issues, of course, around networks, measurement, and data, and Kate, Anne, and Jennene both, I think, all of them, I think, just started to touch on some of those, especially with the mention of AI as well. And then we have some specific issues about technology and service design. And for each of these different 5 themes, we need to consider where we stand with regard to issues around power, control, and influence. And of course, there's people who are linked to this call who have got influence that can actually help the development of this agenda. Right, so with regard to care, the theories that address care, responsibility, and personal relationships. So the question does arise: does the use of technologies constitute cold care? Now, so that is the fear, isn't it? Especially if people are going to be more reliant on technologies and don't have hands-on care, don't have personal contact to the extent that they would wish. And in looking at the issues of care, I've taken particular account of the work of Joan Tronto, American social theorists, because that helps us to be able to justify the use of technologies, because amongst the different parameters that she sets out, there are issues about attentiveness, the way that people do keep an eye on others in a caring kind of way, if you like. And so there's no problem in using technologies to help us to be attentive, and there's no problem in having technologies that will help us to be responsive as well. So that's why Tronto actually works in the context of technologies, although she doesn't address technologies themselves. She talks about the ethic of care. In fact, there was she and a colleague, Bernice Fisher, who actually developed this approach in the past. But I think it's a very, very important approach and does fit with some of our concerns. So this particular theme invites us to address the question and decide for digital health, for telehealth services, how far we value aspects of personal care and how these may or may not be compromised by using technologies, for example, to gather data. And the other one here, networks, measurement and data. I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever we're operating within huge networks, very complex global networks very often that weren't around at the early turn of the millennium to the extent that they are now. And the theories in this area relate to the interconnectedness of our health institutions and the importance of monitoring or surveillance and the necessity of gathering data regarding well-being. So with regard to data, then there is this fear of data harvesting. In the script, I use the word scraping. We can say gathering, we can use some fairly benign terms, but there is a big commercial agenda here that we need to be wary of. And there is a fear quite clearly that the use of such data can reinforce existing inequalities and power relationships, depending on how that those data are gathered and used. And this will impact particularly on women, of course, who are the majority of carers. Eric Topol, the American cardio surgeon, not sure really, he stated that patient ownership of data should be treated as a civil right. And this is one thing that I think is very important as well, that we all need to be emphasizing the fact that we own our personal data, because quite clearly there are some very large companies, the Microsons of this world, who actually regard data once they have it as their property, which they can do what they want with, without putting in the safeguards, if you like, for us to have access to our data and to be able to see how it's used and so forth, or have some control over how it's used. So a big issue is arising for artificial intelligence. So this particular theme invites us to address questions as to, for digital health services, for telehealth, how personal and other data are safeguarded with attention to issues of consent, audit trails and so forth for the ultimate user. So what have we got? The way forward, perhaps, certainly telehealth services configured in the right way must be defensible. We must be able to, put our hands on our hearts and say, this is the right way to do it, or these are the parameters within which we want our service providers to work. These are the parameters within which we want the manufacturers and designers of the technologies to work. I think the script example, it gives a pointer to different perspectives and is something I will go on to develop a bit more, because it just emphasizes the point that our relationship with technologies is important, and indeed our relationship with the suppliers and marketers of these technologies is important. Now, these are also impacted very often by governments and political factors as well. So it's something where we need to be very aware of where the power lies and how we might exercise that influence. It's possible that some of the sort of academic type work I'm doing may help in some of the arguments towards a more ethical, if you like, approach to telehealth and so forth. So this is my mission towards developing a socio-technological theoretical framework with special or specific attention to care and data, and probably headlined by some human rights factors that operates at the interface of health and care services, of technologies used in these contexts, and people and their behaviors. And hopefully that socio-technological theoretical framework, sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful, will help guide us on the way forward. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm Fisk, for your presentation. I will now lead us through Q&A with each of the speakers. So if you have any questions, I'll ask you to please post them in the Q&A panel, and I'll ask all speakers to please come on camera. To begin the Q&A, we have a couple of questions that have come in through the collaborative. So first question is for Jennene from Darren, who's a service provider. Were there any unexpected or particular promising innovations mentioned in the report that have the potential to transform how we provide care for older people in their homes?
I guess for me, possibly not unexpected. It's a hard question for me because I guess I've been monitoring, I guess, the evolution of technology, is particularly as it pertains to home care. But I guess more recently, really starting to see, even though it's not in the report, but really starting to see the role of AI. I think that's probably, for me, the most promising, knowing, of course, that needs to be implemented with caution. But I think that is going to, we're going to see proactive care, I think, with this level of technology, being able to, to be able to use data, to be able to understand risks and to respond, respond in our care delivery to matters that we haven't been able to necessarily uncover in our traditional models or our traditional data sets. So I think for me, that would be the most exciting. Of course, to go with caution, because it does rely on very good data, and of course training the AI as well will be very important.
Thanks, Jennene. A question for Anne and Dr. Barnett from Ashley, who is a community care provider in Darwin. Could you elaborate on any proposed solutions or strategies to address the significant gaps in aged care policy and planning? How do these solutions aim to improve the overall quality of care and support for older adults?
How we're trying to approach it is really biting off things in smaller chunks. We do need a national policy, as Kate alluded to, around technology and the uptake of technology. We're seeing lots of policy drives emerging in different departments. I think what we could do is have a better coordinated approach between, say, the Digital Health Agency, the Department of Health and Ageing, the commissions on quality both in health and aged care, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, who've got some post-royal commission responsibilities around data and minimum data sets. So we need to bring that all together. We need to have an approach that is coordinated. And I guess we as industry players need to influence the agenda.
I would just add to that the Royal Commission report is, I think, the first major review report I've seen focused on the aged care sector that actually pays specific attention to technology. And they have a number of really important recommendations that I hope will be implemented, that I think will make a change. I think overall, I'd be saying that when we're looking at reform at the moment, that it's not just about working out how you might put a technology filter or lens across those reforms, but I'd argue, I think my colleagues would agree with me, that how well providers use technology is going to be key to how well they manage the reform process. That's probably a big comment to make. Yeah. And I mean, there's others that if you want to read the technology roadmap or the Care IT report, or now the data standardization project report, if it's available, the recommendations actually spell out strategies, and that should give you an idea.
Thanks, Kate, and we'll ensure that those reports are linked with this webinar for everyone to review. A question for Professor Fisk. How can community care providers ensure that telehealth services maintain a strong focus on the consumer and care while navigating the challenges and opportunities presented by health data in this new era?
Let's go straight to I think what may be the heart of this question, which is about AI and data and the way that data are collected and how useful that data is going to be. Jennene pointed to it about the need for caution. There really, really does need to be caution here, because there's a lot of positive things said about AI and the fact that you need large data sets, and that of course underpins the motivation or the imperative for some companies about wanting to gather loads and loads of data, including ours and our usage of health services. But that is true in some areas. If you're someone who's looking to skin lesions or something like that, and you've got 10,000 scans or pictures and what have you, then that's going to be really, really helpful in terms of your AI analysis, the training data that Jennene referred to, and actually getting some really, really positive outcomes. And in some areas, like for skin cancers, also breast cancers and one or two other things as well, then AI is proving already to be very, very good at identifying serious health issues for concern, which are less able to be recognised by clinicians. But when it comes to a range of other things where you just haven't got the data sets, I mean, I was on a NICE committee. NICE is the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK for 10 years. And one thing that was always a concern to me was the evidence base for the recommendations on quality standards that they were making was so often based on samples of adults from age 18 to 65. And so there was always this question mark over how valid were those recommendations in relation to older people. The point is that you need to understand the data. And it doesn't need to be big data. It doesn't need to be 10,000 samples. It could be a sample of 60. But if it relates to particular people with a particular condition in a particular community, and you know that data, you know how it was drawn, and you can regard that as representative of that particular population, it's going to give you just as much, if not more, information on the basis of which you can make your judgments regarding the appropriate treatment and the diagnosis and stuff like this. So there is a lot of hype around AI. And manufacturers, of course, want the data. They want to own that data. I made the point about data ownership, by the way, and there are more and more countries that are now affirming that we own our personal data. I'm not quite sure. I'll have to investigate it further, quite where the boundaries lie. But quite clearly, there's some personal information about me that lots of people know anyway, and I'm here on this call, which is a public statement of some sort. But nevertheless, the point is that we do need to be seen to be owning our personal data. And we need to have different levels and types of consent for the way that those data are used, so that the companies or the organizations that are providing services don't have a free-for-all to use our data in whatever way they like, and that they're emphasizing sufficiently the issue of consent so that it could be released, it could be shared in certain circumstances. And I'll mention one other thing. Sorry, I'm going on a bit too long. But just with regard to where the data is stored, where it's held, let's give a call for edge computing, so that data is not collected unnecessarily, so it can be stored in some of the devices in people's homes or at the location of the patient, of the person, of the client, rather than shared immediately with some database in Darwin or Cincinnati or wherever it happens to go. By the way, I'm in a place called Darwin here in Lancashire in the UK at the moment. So I don't know whether there's an ancient link with Darwin in Northern Territory, but there we go. Anyway, yeah, so all those kind of things I think could help. Consent. Oh, and one more thing, audit trails. I mentioned that in my presentation. So if our data is used, is accessed, so we know who accessed it, when and what for, and that we would be able to know whether it conforms with the consent that we may have given about that data, those data as well.
Thanks, Malcolm. Very important points to consider. A regional community care provider has asked Jennene, do you see any innovations that should be a major priority for implementation in community care? And how do organisations afford this implementation?
Good question. Look, I guess when it comes to innovations in community care, I think there is a lot of different organisations that are at different stages to their technology journey. As we know, we have organisations that are still paper-based, right through to organisations that are quite mature in their technology platforms and in their technology maturity. So when it comes to sort of prioritising technology, I think it depends on where you're at in that journey and what your model is and what your strategy is. But I think just generalising for all home care providers, or for many of the home care providers, it is about really going back to basics and making sure that you have a very good client management system that meets your requirements to deliver the model that you're wanting, that will deliver the service experience that you're wanting for both your clients, but also for your staff. So I think getting a good client management system, making sure you can extract the data that you need from that system to make good decisions and timely decisions. And that is about business intelligence and, being able to report on that data in a timely manner. And also in home care, when we're looking for a home care platform, that it must have a very good logistics and rostering platform. I know this is quite boring, but this is the foundations of home care. A logistic and rostering platform, as I mentioned earlier, that can make sure that we are linking efficiently the right staff with the right skills and the right experience and the right attributes to match the needs and aspirations of our client, or their, you know, or their preferences of our clients. So I think at this stage it is really back to basics with some of our home care. And as I said, with organisations that are much more mature, they're exploring they're exploring voice of the customer programs and voice of the employee programs, and using AI to come up with, you know, sentiment scores, and they're looking at smart technologies and linking that in with their, you know, with a single pane of glass. Like, very few that I've seen, very few, but you know, there's different technology priorities depending on the organisation.
Thank you, Jennene, for those important points, and important to consider with the upcoming community care reform expected for 2025.
You did ask me about affordability. I think that is a very big, tough one to answer here. I guess when I look at home care, you know, when you're running residential aged care, you know, you invest a lot in the bricks and mortar of the buildings and the infrastructure and the equipment and everything that makes a residential care operate. In home care, your bricks and mortar is your technology platform. It does provide, like I said, the experience, the efficiency, and also meets all your regulatory requirements, or it should. So it is a necessary investment that boards need to consider. But at the same time, our funding models, our pricing models in aged care also needs to factor in the cost of, you know, of operating a 21st century home care service. So we need the funding to also support it, but also the boards need to understand that they also have a commitment that they need to make in technology. This is, you know, without it, they will become irrelevant.
Thank you, Jennene. That is all the time we have now for Q&A. If you have any additional questions, please post them on the collaborative site, and we'll follow up with the speakers after today's session. Thank you, speakers, for answering our questions today and for your presentation. Let's see what is next for the collaborative. Our next webinar will be held on Tuesday, the 24th of October at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and will be on the topic of advancing in aged and community care, including collaborative intelligence and AI, a key theme of today's presentation. To register for this event, please visit www.satcommunity.com.au. We will be posting today's webinar on the collaborative site, so if you haven't already done so, please go online and register. You will also gain access to hundreds of resources, exclusive events and forums on assistive technology and innovation in community care. If you have any further questions or inquiries, please email us at sat@communityresourcing.com.au. Once again, I would like to thank the members of the collaborative research team and today's speakers, Jennene Buckley, Dr. Kate Barnett, Anne Livingstone, and Professor Malcolm Fisk. Thank you everyone for your attendance today.